So we are talking about the Beak of the Finch, and we have some travelers from the National Geographic Lindblad's Galapagos voyage from April 22nd. It's July 2nd. So I'm proposing that we do some catching up. How we doing? What we're doing? Then let's talk about the scientists. Then let's talk about the science. Then let's talk about the writer and his storytelling, and then some updates on some of the key characters, and then we can check out. Is that okay? And of course, the main scientist is our friend Charles Darwin, born in 1809, and went on his voyage around the world in the Beagle for a bunch of years in the mid-30s. He came out with the book, The Origin of the Species, in 1859 and passed in 1882. And in a way, I guess we're sort of living in that echo of that work, you know, and contemplating his voyages and his discoveries. So there he is as a young man. And he went all over the place. But of course, what we're most interested in is the time that he spent in the Galapagos. Not that long, really. But quite impactful. And there's the HMS Beagle, the diagram of it, you know, a kind of small ship when you think about it. But apparently over the course of the voyage, Darwin would leave the ship and spend a lot of time on land and do his studies and research, and then rejoin the voyage. And so there he is as a young man in his early 20s, you know, taking his specimens and making his notes. But the people that we're really here to talk about are these guys. And oh, my hat is off to this amazing scientific couple, Rosemary and Peter Grant, both born in 1936 and married since 1962. They're still with us. They're professors emeritus from Princeton University, and they've been researching on the island of Daphne Major since 1973. And there you see them, you know, on the island, you know, sort of doing their work. So let's just stop here and just open the conversation to, let's talk about the scientists. What do you all think about these guys and the work they did?
Well, the class of 1877 looks a little spurious.
Well, that's the name of the name of his professorial, you know.
Okay, that's his chair.
That's right. The name of his, yeah.
1877.
There's an endowed chair.
That's how many classes Princeton had by the time he graduated?
I don't know, honey. It's the endowed name of his chair. What can I tell you? The class of 1877 endowed a chair. What can I say?
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
I would just say that as they were studying and understanding evolution, they themselves were great examples of how their whole mindset and how they were evolving as well. And just really starting to say, oh, it wasn't the way we thought, it was this way, you know, and I was going to start off as just a short project, and then now it's wound up like every year. It's again proof that we do change.
What else can you say about them as scientists?
What was impressive to me was they're trying to put data to a area of science that people didn't think you could put data to, and the perseverance that they stuck with it. So year after year, seed after seed, beak after beak, was just amazing to me.
I mean, can you imagine in the blazing sun, they're sitting there counting the seeds in the dirt, you know, a meter by meter, just like every single seed. They're measuring the little beaks. They're weighing the little birds. They know all the birds by sight, and they hear them. They go, oh, that's number 27. You know, he sounds like he's got a cold.
I was going to say that I agree completely with Merle. The rigor with which these guys attacked the theory of evolution and did the rigor with which they assembled and analyzed the data, improving as technology improved and coming up with what could only be considered as proof of something that nobody thought at the time was proven. Actually, nobody thought, people still don't think in this country, that it's a theory that could be proven. And they have gotten the data to prove the theory.
That was one of the observations that I took, Vicki, was that it was like that so many people, so many scientists accepted the theory of evolution and natural selection through logic and whatever, and but how do you actually prove it, that it's actually happening, real time? So here's a fossil of a thing, and here's another fossil of a thing, but that's the past. And I was struck by the fact that they really figured that out, how to make, and then the author is bringing in all these other discussions of moths that evolve, if proof against DDT. And so in terms,
that was magnificent. And the viruses and how quickly they evolve.
Yeah.
AIDS, as well as.
And also that not only that they proved that natural selection is driving evolution, but also Darwin thought it would take centuries for that to happen. And they proved that it could happen within even a couple of generations.
Yeah,
so that was amazing.
Did that strike you as like, what the F? Like what? Was that like a startling revelation to you?
Absolutely. So while we were in Florida watching the grandkids, we actually had them watch the little 15-20-minute video as well. And the grandkids were just amazed that you could actually see evolution occur in such a short period because of drought. And then 7 years later, the excessive rainfall and what it did. And here they were able to document and see that in such a short period of time.
Wow. That's amazing. I put the link to the video in the chat, so save your chat because there'll be a lot of links in there. Yeah, that to me was mind blowing. Like, what did you say? Like in one generation? You what?
So I thought it was just the fragility of the environment there in the Galapagos that made evolution so rapid. But then, as Merle was saying, we're getting to looking here in the US, what happened with DDT, what's happened with viruses. And what's happened, the degree to which we humans are affecting evolution.
Right.
Oh,
that was a big one. So one of the first takeaways was because they were able to document the swing in the weather so rapidly, that the extremes of dryness and wetness, and see the immediate impact on all the birds, then it's obvious to say, well, we're doing that to the environment every which way, That was weird. That was
every animal is so adaptable too. The story of the diamondback moths dropping their legs off to escape DDT was amazing. But it makes you realize all kinds of things that everything's doing all the time. So it makes sense that if you're adapting all the time, that evolution could be moving quickly. But I never would have thought of that before.
No, and the book is from 19. So the book comes out in 95, and he's documenting stuff that had happened in the last 20 years of the data that they're having. So this is kind of, by the time we're reading it today, it's sort of old news, if you will. And it's had a chance to reverberate through science, and their impact is obviously great. So I'm struck by, they're meticulous. I think Vicki was saying they're meticulous, their perseverance. And it's just two people, with their helpers, and there's I don't even think there's fresh water on the island. I mean, everything they had to bring with them to survive. And there's no cyclotrons or billion-dollar grants. You know what I mean? It's staggering what two people can do, or one person or two people. It's a team. So it's a team. It's important to say they're a team. Now, again, they're tenured, and they have a salary at Princeton, so there's backup behind them, and they've certainly secured grants and other things to bring them.
And a lot of graduate students help.
A lot of help, very important, but it's their willpower and their tenacity as two scientist individuals that just blew me away. That it's like, give me a fulcrum and I'll move the world. What did he say, Archimedes? I mean,
I'll change the earth. Yeah. That really struck me too. Was we're using all these different words, but I think the appropriate word here is grit. There's a book by Angela Duckworth that's worth looking at called Grit, and she studies what is the trait, what is the characteristic in a human being that helps them overcome insurmountable odds. What's that one thing? And it's not just intelligence. It's not just she actually created a factor that the U.S. military uses it's a grit factor, and it can actually help you understand and determine the level of tenacity, or throw any adjective you want it there, people's ability to stay with something long term. And this is like the perfect use case, the perfect example of the power of grit and determination. And it's the right people at the right time in the right location, and all those factors. It's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, and this idea of I won't say it's going against the common wisdom or bucking dogma, but the idea of saying, like, we can answer this question. The question is answerable, despite the fact that many people don't even believe in evolution, or that this particular piece of the theory is not able to be proved. So the idea of the human being saying, no, we're going to figure it out, and just let the facts, we're going to collect the data and let's see what the facts show us. This idea of it's a kind of fearlessness, even, really, or courage to take on that task in spite of what science might say. This is something that you can't prove, or it's not worth your time. So the idea of them, and then the world catching up with them. So they were sort of these pioneers that I think are very important in sort of not just science, but in the human endeavor of people pushing at the edge. And no one gave them permission. It's not like it's not like it was a sexy thing for them to go to this desert island. It just blows me away.
Yeah, and I think that the grit concept is great, because it's both getting into the dirt, but also the fact that they captured and tagged and tracked virtually every bird on the island was amazing. But the other thing that struck me about that was that if we hadn't been in the Galapagos and seen how you could just walk up to every animal and none of them would flinch or walk away, I don't think I would have understood how they could have done that without having been in the Galapagos. But having been there, I can see it. Yeah, they'll all just stand right there for you. Let them grab you. That was really interesting.
And Tom, you found another book that the Grants wrote?
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat. So this is
they wrote that in 2014.
Yeah. So this is their links at Princeton, as well as an article in the Princeton Alumni Magazine about them. The article is called "The People Who Saw Evolution in Progress," and then their own book from the Princeton Press is called 40 Years of Evolution, that came out a few years ago, that we're going to get. So this is the summation, their valedictory. They have been honored quite a bit. So you see here's Daphne Major, a tiny island off the north coast of Santa Cruz. So it's a teeny tiny, and look at it. It's like a volcano. It's clearly a ruined volcano that's sticking up out of the water. And I think what the author was telling us, that there's only one way on. I don't know if it's over here, but it's called the doormat or something. It's just crazy. The whole story is crazy of how to get even into the island and then to sort of make their way around here. And that's their book, 40 Years of Evolution. And there's our famous beaks. So their research then lays out all the things that are happening, right? So the fascinating story is what pressures make these beaks change, and they're saying, well, it looks like the environment, right? With the rain, the lack of rain, and the food. So it's the competition for food, and then sex. So who likes who? You know, whose beak is going to get you a date? You know, and the environmental pressure of getting your food. So he was talking about how much energy it took to crack one seed versus, you know, birds that need to take 5 minutes to get one seed, while the other guy ate 10 seeds. And it's just so fascinating about how to put all that together in some way to make it explainable. Oh yeah, it makes sense. Tiny beak, too much effort. I can't feed myself. I can't have energy. I don't have a bright plumage. No girl is going to like me. I can't even fly. So I'm dead. It's just fascinating how all those details, you know, what they were measuring, sort of built up into this narrative of drama, of life and death. Who knew?
Well put. And I was fascinated that they outlined so clearly it's not only natural selection, it's sexual selection. And what was the third?
Well, the food, the environment, the weather impacts the food, and who's able to get it fast. So if you were lucky enough to have the right beak of the moment, you're going to thrive and be more robust, attract more mates, and just be more generally healthy to compete. And she, you know, the book was saying, you know, the little guys, when it was dry, they were spending so much energy cracking a nut, they lost their plumage. They couldn't even fly, so they would perish. But then when it rained a few years later, it was the opposite. The little guys, the little beaks, were able to tackle the plentiful seeds, whereas the big guys were lumbering and their beaks were not suited. And it was a whiplash. And so what I just love this little piece in the video when he names this particular finch, you know, and he says this was like 20, 30, 25. Oh, he died, you know, and he holds the picture up and it's like a family member. You remember that in the video? He's like, oh no, not 24, 27. Oh, my dear friend. Dude, yeah. You studied thousands of these birds. Did you remember this one? You know, he's like I don't know if this is like the stereotypical scientist, you know, who is so lost in his work, he doesn't realize how charming he is. But I found that a very funny moment, you know, where he's rifling for all his pictures and he finds the one, and you can see him recalling this individual bird of the thousands that he looked at. So you can download this video, by the way, from this website if you want to. I thought it was pretty cool. So what else about the science, you know, of what was going on there? You know, this was the theory that basically they were trying to give life to, that in the ancient times, somehow a finch came from the mainland over the water, presumably flying with the wind behind him, lands on one of the islands, presumably finds another girl finch, otherwise we're kind of dead in the water. They start to breed on one island in a certain way with whatever environment of that particular island was, and then they fly over another island, sort of get settled there, right? The conditions are different. So they were talking about the elevation. So on those islands that had the differentiation, there's more juicy things up here where it's a little colder, a little more moist, but down on the bottom, more cactus, right? So what they're saying is the finches that landed in that particular place started to adapt to take advantage of whatever was there. And over time, you start to see this branching. Is that?
What I thought was fascinating was a comment that not only can species develop separately into separate species, but it's possible under the right conditions for the species to kind of go back and to lose that specialization, depending again on the weather and what food's available. And that's a concept I had never heard of.
Right. And
Fission and the fusion, they called that, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, fusion versus fission.
And that was one of Darwin's The Great Mysteries. That was the quote from Darwin. This is the greatest mystery of all time. Why are there so many different kinds of critters on the planet? And so here they're saying we can see it in action. We can demonstrate and help answer the great question from Darwin about why does a new species happen? And so it's the idea that, okay, so the critters are evolving in parallel to them, right, on the different islands in such a way, so the theory goes, that should they meet again, they fly back together, they will not mate with each other. So I don't recognize you anymore, big beak guy. I'm a little beak guy. You look like, and you have a different song. That was the other thing. There's songs. So I don't know you. I don't know who you are. I'm not going to mate with you. You don't turn me on. I want another little beak guy over here. I'm gonna seek out my little beak guy.
There's so many parallels between that and just mankind. And if we just so I just look at I grew up in Kansas. We had 4 distinct seasons. We learned to deal with all 4 of them. I know people in Winnipeg, Canada, that if it gets to 75 degrees, they simply cannot stand the heat. And here we are in Austin, in how just even in our own lives, that I can't stand the cold the way I used to. Stand the heat. We had that problem. People that enjoy the cold, and the whole thing about our plumage, our physical features. Thank God I found someone that does want to mate with me. but just us not understanding that our own lives were having this evolution, and it takes a scientist studying something that we think is, it's just a critter from nature, for us to start to get this better understanding that we ourselves are really evolving.
And I just have to say, Tom, based on what you were just saying, your example of sexual selection by, I don't like your beak, wasn't it just too ironic that Fitzroy, the captain of the Beagle, was a, what do you call it, a phrenologist?
Yes.
And almost sent Darwin home because he didn't like his nose?
Yes. What
I love that.
what a story. Are you kidding me? How the world could have changed, or spun in a different way had that happened.
But I think the other force that we were talking about too is divergence, and because divergence led into the speciation if it was persistent enough, as I understood it.
Yes.
And that was just fascinating, again, about how we get to this variety.
But even though he points out that they were starting to observe 2 different species still mating, they weren't supposed to. So even there, nature is still mysterious. And though the laws that they're formulating would seem to say a giraffe is not going to mate with a polar bear, okay, clearly, but still, it's not as cut and dry as I thought it was, because there they are observing these 2 different species mating and doing very well. So what the hell?
And sometimes the hybrids do better, depending again on what's in the environment.
So it's like a giant crapshoot out there. And then if you add the bombardment of the radio waves and gamma waves and all he's talking about them. Now, Darwin obviously didn't know about, DNA and genes and, and the things that are affecting us, but he had a theory that was something down there, inside our bodies. So if you add the pressure of the environment that we are now responsible, plus all the radiation and the global warming and psychic pressure, that we are, it's a cauldron. It's like nothing is stable, is I guess was what I'm feeling. It's not as stable as we thought we were. And so we have this famous progression. And the quote from the book that I thought is, evolution is a very near thing. Precisely where we wish to control the environment most tightly and possess it most completely, we are powerless to do so. besieged and beleaguered by resistance movements that seems to spring up faster than we can cap them, are like the heads of a hydra, says the author. And that I thought was kind of inspiring and scary. So we think we're the masters, right? No way, man. We are responding. We are reacting to our own presence on the planet, as well as what we are, what nature's bringing us.
Well, I thought the end of the book certainly made that point. The story of antibiotic resistance and insect resistance certainly makes that point, that man can't control that.
Well, what was
and
interesting to me was that the finches won't lay eggs. If there's no rain, I think it was in January, that's the first or second week in January, February, they just won't, they just know. They're so in tune with nature that they will not mate, they will not lay eggs if they don't get that first big rainstorm, because they just know, like they live and literally die by the environment. I mean, growing up in New York City, especially, weather is, you don't even know. It could be raining outside and it could be snowing, it could be 100, it could be 0. And it doesn't matter. You don't see the seasons change, you don't see the leaves fall, you don't see the snow melt, you don't hear the wind. We're so unaffected, or we pretend to be. Where them, if there's no rain, like they know it, right? The researchers were dancing in the rain, celebrating with the weather patterns. And we're so isolated and so removed from it. And in a way that we try and control it, and we're seeing obviously that we can't, of how in tune they are to it, is something we could probably learn from.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously the researchers were in the nature. I mean, it doesn't get any more unisolated than their position on the island, day after day, week after week, month after month, with whatever happens, happens. If it rains, if it's a dry season, they are with the animals, the scientists, with the few creature comforts that they bring with them. But they are completely the opposite of what you're saying, Cliff, because they are seeing the impact of everything. Is it dry? Is it wet? Is it a wind? Is it something happening on the island that we're going to see it right away? Yeah. So the danger of being, I guess what I'm taking from that is the danger of being isolated from nature. Cut ourselves off.
And how in tune they are with it. I mean, the mating patterns will change if there's no rain by a certain week. They don't have calendars. It's instinct, but it's built in. Right. They know how survival is so in tune with that pattern of nature.
So one other thing was really interesting. Just last week, National Geographic had an article about a new finding, a new way to date remains that are in a cave. Because much of the way of dating has to do with radiation of, I forget what, but it has to do with the effect of the sun and weather on carbon remains. But they figured out a new way to do it and put a new date on remains found in caves in South Africa, and found that, I think it's Homo erectus, but I don't remember for sure, that it actually was around 2 million years before we thought. And so these guys weren't as explicitly separated by time as, the pictures I grew up to see.
Basically, how much of an overlap when you went from one species to another, and did you have all 3 species at any one time, So when you go from the Homo erectus to the Homo netherlanders, was that a rapid shift, or did it take an unbelievable amount of time?
Well, apparently we still have Neanderthal DNA in us. So we have some common ancestors. They must have been mixing and matching way back in the ancient times, before nature sorted it out and the Neanderthals went away. One thing that I heard in one guy's book was a difference in the brain patterns was the Neanderthals stopped at a mountain because they didn't have the imagination to to think what's beyond the mountain.
Wow.
So when they came to a barrier, it just says, well, there's no place to go. We stop. But for some critters who had something better, a little more imagination, they could go, well, we can go around here. we can go over or something. And that ability for foresight maybe has been passed down to us and led to our, whatever, culture, language, cooperation. So it's kind of a theory, an interesting theory to wonder that the mind itself, and this is what the author talks about, I'm going to get to this in a second, that the mind itself is a feature of differentiation, obviously, that led to where we are today, for better or worse. So let's move our discussion now to the writer. We can always come back and talk about some of these things. They're all mixed together. The writer is Jonathan Weiner. He's born in 1953. He's got a lot of body of work behind him. He's, a popular writer for different science journals and places. He's got a website that you can check out, and he is a professor at Columbia, and he specializes in, as you would imagine, science journalism. So here's his websites. You can see the story of his winning the Pulitzer Prize for this book back in the day, as well as his teaching website at Columbia. I actually entertained the notion of calling all these people, actually calling the Grants and calling Paul, calling Jonathan to say, you want to join our, but I mean, it's not out of the question. We might be able to do something,
What do you have to lose?
with, maybe if we work this with Lindblad, Cliff, we could have Rosemary and Paul, Rosemary and Peter join us. Tell us.
Listen, we have the connections already for that at the Charles Darwin Research Center.
Yeah.
We have the It's if anyone has that connection, it's worth a shot.
But wouldn't it be fun to speculate like a reunion of that author with the Grants before they pass away, and to bring all the people who ever took the Galapagos tour, and to have Mr. Lindblad give them some special thing, like an honor or something on behalf of the travelers to the Galapagos, and then have them just reminisce, and if you want to go crazy, have a remote camera on Daphne Major, and they're not going to go back there, and they're 88, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's so cool.
Yep. We could put a webinar together, and that would, everybody would win. It would get the word out more. It would connect people whose lives have drifted in different directions.
I mean, I just find these two individuals to be so extraordinary. I want to go have tea with them.
You should reach out to them, and I'm happy to make my connections with the resources at Lindblad and see if you could put something special.
Well, let's talk about that.
It wouldn't hurt. Why not?
All right. So what do we think about the writing style and the way that Jonathan told the story?
Oh, he's such a good storyteller. It's you think about science books, and some of them are written in such an opaque style or sometimes such a superior style. And this is so down to earth. It's just a terrific story.
Right. I was thrilled by it, and what are we talking about? Measuring beaks, but I think he's a bit of a poet.
I was fascinated by how he organized it. He totally drew it in and started with the basics of evolution and then expanded it, as I think Merle had said earlier, into the moths and antibiotics, and then the generation of diversity, GOD, which I'm sure we'll get back to. I thought it was an amazing structure he used and a very compelling storytelling.
And I like that he also brought in the other people, the other scientists, so we got to know it's kind of like the Avengers. You had your key guys, your key heroes, but you had your helper guys who, in their own way, added a lot to the science. And and I think there's this community. Again, this is the collegiality of science, and their particular style of teaching and researching is they bring the young people above into the work. They ask their own questions, and then they go off with their own careers and add a lot to it. And I'm reminded of Jane Goodall, and I mean, I think her research is similar in longevity and the patience. Again, the idea of sitting quietly and watching these chimps just counting their behaviors is like, whoever did that, why would you do that? And of course, she's inspired thousands and thousands of scientists and young people to follow in her footsteps. And I'm feeling the same vibe from, from the grants, and how many, if you could put together all the alumni of all the people they taught, and all, you'd probably have 1,000, what a party that would be. And I love that. I mean, I think that's so important, in our culture, in our time, to remember this idea of collaboration and nurturing the young ones to come up and to ask the questions and to give them the space and the tools. And then they added so much, to the knowledge base. And so we gave us a lot of that, one guy in particular that I will get to in a minute.
He has a beautiful writing style, and he is a poet. You're right, Tom. I mean, who would have thought anybody could make a discussion of barnacles interesting? But the barnacles are interesting, and a phrase that stuck with me, he talked about the profusion and confusion of barnacles.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understood what that meant, but I loved it. I mean, it's just and also the way he would use examples to just bring concepts alive. I was talking before, you were talking before about how the birds weren't afraid of people. And then he talked about how, in fact, they would sometimes land on people to escape the animals they were afraid of. And then he says, one time they landed on Rosemary.
Yeah.
Just those kind of little stories. And I also love the stories about the songs. Yes, he talks about how there generally are 2 songs and, in each grouping. But then he says, but then pointing out that most of the males would adopt the songs of their fathers. That was kind of touching. Just the way he spun all that out was really, really fascinating.
Well, and he he spent time with them. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff to render, because they've been in the field for decades. So yeah, how to unpack their story to make it compelling to the reader, and then to bring in his own knowledge base and things that obviously the grants were not studying, but he found relevant, as a journalist and kind of person who's putting the pieces together, if you will, for us, the reader, not knowing anything about any of this stuff. Have I heard of evolution? If you put a gun on my head and said, Tom, for $1,000, explain the theory of evolution, it would come out in halting. But he lays all that out so that you, as you were saying, Vicki, we get sort of a evolution 101. This is kind of where we're at. This is kind of how we got here. Here's who these guys are, and here's what they're studying, and here's why they're studying it, and here's the data from that.
Well, and I like that he also talked about their disciples and the labs that they set up, the animals they were studying, and how they were replicating in guppies or sticklebacks what the grants had started doing with the birds.
Yeah, and that the questions that they ask spurn more questions. And also, as the tools got more sophisticated, so as they could, they brought in obviously computers. He had a camera. I mean, the camera was part of his tool bag. Calipers. It's like, it was like from the 1870s. I mean, the toolkit was pretty basic, right? A notebook, pencils, But then he did have a camera. They were obviously taking pictures. They were recording the song. So now we're getting into the 1970s, with technology. And then they talked about putting the data into computers. So in the 90s, we're talking about DOS-based programs, to make these calculations. And of course, today with supercomputers and visualization, I would love to know how and who is doing what with their data, because it's miles, hundreds of miles away from when they were starting, with an amber lit screen. You couldn't have any visualization, of these.
But that's why I want to read their book, because their book was written in the 14.
Right. So
it's 20 years after Weiner's book was written.
Exactly. So again, taking the same data sets that they've had and have sat on, some new applications, some new way to run it through the computer, as it were, could reveal yet things that it's just been sitting there, that they didn't have the ability to see, because they just didn't have that level of, of access to the tools and the visualizations.
Well, and they found that even on their sabbatical, when they were able to look at their data, that there were things they did not know they had seen until they looked at the data.
Wow. Did not know they had, let me put that in the chat. Did not know they had seen looking at the data. So that's pretty profound there, Merle, because how many things can we say, you know, that we don't see, you know, through our daily lives because we don't look at the data.
Well, and these guys were so focused on it. You know, we're not focused on anything the way they were. At least most of us aren't.
No, but it makes me want to put something over the mantelpiece. Look at the data. Newly.
Or
You
just look.
Or just look.
In general, right?
Yeah, just look.
How much, when we were in the Galapagos and everyone else there, how much goes on right underneath our noses, right underneath our own beaks?
Yeah.
Right?
So
How
true.
much goes on that we don't even know. We have no,
So Jonathan, then he goes on and he brings in, of course, the discussion of human beings. And this is where to me, he starts to get very cosmic and far away from the original discussion of measuring beaks on a desert island, so to speak. He says, the mind is our beak. And the human mind is ever more variable than the brain. Did that part resonate with anybody? Did that bring up anything for anybody?
yeah.
Remember whether this came before. I don't remember exactly where it came, talking about how the moths most affected southern planters, and they were the ones who denied evolution. And the incredibly rapid evolution of viruses, and then the generation of diversity and the genetic engineers. It stunned me. And I got to mention one quick thing. If y'all haven't read Kurt Vonnegut's book, The Galapagos, we listened to it on a road trip, and it was pretty stunning as he evaluates everything we've talked about in his own way, in a bitter, funny, ironic, and sarcastic story that continually goes back to humans use their big brains and acid rain came about. Kind of thing. Continually
wrote about the Galapagos. I thought I'd read everything by him. I love him. I have to get that right away.
Yeah, it's next on my list.
It was hard to imagine this evolution that he takes you through in the book. But having been to Galapagos,
Yeah.
and you're just thinking, oh my God, yes, and how the people would change to adapt to the environment there, and this theme of our big brains. Our big brains took us down paths that we didn't need to go, and now we have smaller brains that help us focus on what we really need to do.
You know, another thing that really struck me about reading the book and Weiner is that this is what we're reading. This, you know, we would never know about the scientists. I wouldn't know about most of the science without this book, which in a way is a kind of an amazing, you know, press release, if you want to call it. You know, hey, look, here's all this incredible work that's been done these last 30, 40 years, and world, you don't know about it. And I thought that was an amazing accomplishment by Weiner. And also today, it strikes me, you know, this may sound a bit like a far-fetched analogy, but, you know, today, July 2nd, is the actual Independence Day of the United States. If you go back, you'll see a quote from John Adams, who wrote right back then, and he predicted on July 2nd every year, Americans will have bonfires, they'll have fireworks, they'll have barbecues. And he was right about all that, except we're wrong about the date. Why do we celebrate on July 4th? Because that's when the press release was issued. The Declaration of Independence, probably the greatest press release in world history. The Continental Congress voted independence on July 2nd. And that was the date that really mattered. That was the vote that created independence. So I always think about that, you know, when you think about the power of media and how things are communicated and how we all look at the world, and sometimes how you get things all mixed up because you get distracted by the press release. So anyway, just
The problem with that is if we celebrated the 2nd, we wouldn't get Monday off.
What? That's not going to work.
So the 4th it is.
only 1 out of 7 times that the 4th is on Monday anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
But you make a good point, and that really consumes me as a civic educator and activist, is how do we know what we know, and whose job is it to tell us the shit that we're supposed to know?
Right.
So you would say, well, it's the schools. We're supposed to learn about evolution in college or elementary school, or we're supposed to learn about why we should vote in Sunday school, or etc. Right? And the failure, you could say the failure of the media has been maybe to completely drop the ball on doing what Jon Stewart called making the important interesting. So helping to swing the searchlight of our scattered attention on things that really matter, and helping us understand them, like really understand them, and not not propaganda and not hate mongering, but like what this guy did is turned his lens onto to a fairly complicated subject and take the time as a storyteller to explain to us, the uninitiated, and we, the reader, have enough brain power to read the book, and we can understand what the author is saying us, and then it's up to us to do something with it. So we understand the author. Thank you, author, for taking the time to make a nice book. We took the time to read your book. Now I'm going to go watch cartoons and play Farmville on my phone and completely ignore everything that you taught me. No, now it's on us, right? He did his job. So to me, it's the civic engagement aspect of after we learn.
For me not to derail our conversations at times with political tangents, but education, even the evolution of education in Texas right now is where they take slavery, call slavery involuntary relocation. I'm not kidding you. They are proposing that they teach it in that fashion. So what you said about this wonderful information being there, it's still incumbent upon us. It's not going to be the educators. It's not going to be the Jon Stewarts if we don't have a little bit of self-motivation, a little bit of drive ourselves. And when I look at the screens, and I mean no offense here, but we are somewhat the elitists because we were able to go to the Galapagos and gain that experience. And when you try to have a conversation similar to this with so many people that haven't had that experience, it's how do you, like Jon Stewart was saying, how do you make it interesting enough that you can get the person that didn't get to experience it to engage with it?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That is a consuming question for my work under the heading of civic education and civic engagement, or critical thinking, or however we want to call it. But yeah,
and even scarier than Texas, Arizona is about to vote to get rid of public education and give every parent $7,000 and tell them to educate their kid any way they want.
Yeah, we're going to derail the conversation into politics, and oh boy, there's been so many times I wanted to say something snarky, but we are seeing change in America, and even though we talked about evolution of animals, the evolution of democracy is going on right in front of our eyes.
Yes.
Right. Or the devolution.
Yes.
Democracy, evolution in the backwards direction, because it's also, about, it's not only about who controls the narrative, it's about who tells the truth. And does the truth even get told? I mean, I don't want to derail us either, but, for instance, the recent Supreme Court decision on guns, it purports to be based on, and I'm not going to get into, the craziness of all that, except to say that it purports to be based on history. But in fact, they get the history all wrong. One of my best friends from high school is one of the leading experts in the country on gun control, and he's been writing books and been all over the media talking about how pretty much all of the statements that the Supreme Court is making to defend this decision are wrong historically. So even putting aside whether you agree with the decision or not, what you think about guns or whatever, that what they're saying to drive the changes in law are actually counterfactual.
Would you share his name?
Sure. I'll write it in the chat.
Well, but I think it is relevant to this conversation because the grants are not ideologues. I guess they're scientists. I guess you could say they believed in evolution. My theory would be, if we go back in time and catch the young grants as they were leaving for their first expedition and say, hey, Rosemary, Peter, do you guys believe in evolution? I think they probably would have said, yes, of course, we're scientists. We're going to go study something. But I don't think they're ideologues. They're not politicians. And yet, I wonder the role of scientists in this fight that you're talking about. So from my point of view, the scientists do have to have a role to play here. And this is part of my larger critique of the nonprofit world. It's not enough to study things anymore, sadly. And so to Paul's point, the fact that the Supreme Court was factually incorrect is irrelevant. The power that put them there is relevant. And if every scientist who cringed at that decision doesn't vote, then they're part of the problem. If every sociologist and criminologist and lawyer who read that decision goes, this is total bullshit, my 12-year-old could pull it apart, but they're not part of the political process, then they're letting the powers that be put those Supreme Court justices in place and remain in place. That's part of my.
Please add to the chat your statement about the misunderstanding of facts, the misrepresentation of facts isn't important. It's the power that put them there. Brilliant.
So that's my personal work is about power for justice. So that's where I'm going with my own work. But I think it's instructive because even though the book was written in 1995, they're talking about global warming. He said, as Vicki mentioned, the farmers in the South who don't believe in evolution, whoever they might be, should be, because they're gonna lose their livelihoods as they continue to be unfruitfully spraying DDTs, and it's not going to get them the result they want. And yet they're not. Some of them are not open to the science that would explain why. So again, somebody's not doing their job. If the farmers, or whoever don't believe in evolution and they're being counterproductive, they're going to lose their livelihoods in their farms, but they still may not believe in evolution. So there's something at a loss here. So let's head to.
As someone who grew up in an agricultural area and saw the impact of Monsanto and their seeds, within less than 20 years, the power of the Monsanto product was diminished because the weeds themselves had already evolved where what Monsanto was doing was no longer effective. And Monsanto has had to go back and readjust their formula because the weeds keep evolving. But yet farmers and ranchers know this, but yet there still is denial of evolution.
And Monsanto has a powerful marketing and lobbying budget that trumps the ability of the National Association of Teachers to get their message across. You know what I'm saying? So you have.
Yeah, but it's just they're living the evolution, but yet they want to deny the evolution.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yes. right? And that, to me, is another great theme of modern America. So let's just, as we head into our conclusion here, let's just take a look at the updates of some of our key players. This guy I really like Dolph, because he's the guy that started doing the computers and in the 90s. And so where is he now? He has his own lab at the University of British Columbia, where he continues to move on in his work. He says we investigate the ecological forces that drive the rapid origin of new species. So he's completely motivated and moved. You could say his life's work, comes out of his early experience as a young man, working with the grants in the Galapagos. And he continues now, he's influencing generations of young people who are coming into his lab and taking his classes and going into his field work. And you can see him at this website. And he has a very funky music video that I think is pretty funny, where he's talking about being in the pond. So he's rapping. Clicking on that link will take you to YouTube and see him from 2009 rapping about his scientific work. Our friends, the Grants, have been showered with honors, including the Japanese version of the Nobel Prize called the Kyoto Prize in 2009, but they've been honored by the Royal Society, the Linnaean Society, the Balzian Prize for population. I mean, basically, if there's an award that has anything to do with biology or the environment, they have won it, and deservedly so. Here you see them from the Kyoto Prize ceremony. Yeah, I would imagine if there was a Nobel Prize in biology, they probably would have won that too, but there isn't. And our friend Jonathan continues to teach. There he is, a little older than his author picture. Like all of us, he's got the little gray stuff going on. And he is the Maxwell Geffen Professor of Medical and Scientific Journalism and co-director of the Master's Program in Science Journalism at Columbia. So as we wind up our time together, we do what we call checking out. So we just kind of say, what was this experience like for you? And what did you learn from it, or anything that's going on with you right now? And I'm going to post our website in the chat.
Question: how were you all impacted by that final discussion of what genetic engineers are doing and the group, the movement, generation of development? DVD.
Yeah. I'd say that's a frightening development in genetic engineering.
Genetic generation of diversity, GOD.
The idea that we are going to that we're meddling with the code, we can start to create our own forms of life, that we can patent forms of life, is so scary to me. Again, can you outlaw it? You try to regulate it. The guy who did the thing with the clone with the sheep or something, and he got reprimanded. But it's like Frankenstein. If we can do it, they're going to do it. And I'm afraid that they're gonna take this genie out of the bottle and cause some horrible thing to happen that we won't be able to stop. But yeah, it's very scary.
But did we not gain from some things? And maybe I'm incorrect here, but what helped us get plant-based meats?
Mm-hmm.
The same skill set, the same research, but someone took it in an avenue that they didn't want to create a new live being, but they really wanted to pursue something else. So I love science, but yeah, it's pretty scary. As Einstein, let us truly understand what you do with the science is more important than the discovery of the science.
Well, that's always been the case. The scientists that invented all the atomic physics that led to the atomic bomb, huge debate amongst them. They were saying, well, we shouldn't even publish this shit because it'll wreck the world. And others are saying we have a duty to do it. We had scientists that worked for the Nazis who believed in their country, just as we had scientists working for the Americans. And there's been a shitload written about what if Werner Heisenberg and his team working for the Nazis had gotten there first, right? And so he's saying, why? I'm using science to advance my country. What are you knocking me for? You're doing the same. So yeah, super crazy issues.
But the ability for us to, they call it additive manufacturing or 3D printing, but how you can start to print biomedical products or parts of the body, and how we're able to take and produce body organs from what we're learning. I don't know where we'll be in 1,000 years, but it will be significantly different than what it is in our lifetime.
Nuri, as the only physician in the group, I'm wondering how that affected you, what your thoughts were there.
And we're talking about this, the geode. It's the same thing that you guys are saying, that in a way there is a lot of positive that can come of it and discovery of cures for diseases. And at the same time, it can be used for really horrible things to be done. So
Yeah, one other point Narita's made to me too about the evolution is
just look at COVID and what has happened in the last 2 years and how it has evolved and how we are reacting to it and how it's changing and the disease. And, it's really interesting to see also that, so.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a lot there. The science of immunology was there and went into overdrive to create vaccines, but the human side of policy was not as advanced as the science. And so we have this fractured response where it was politicized and mocked for political reasons. Again, this is the human side of our equation is not up to the, I would say, up to the science. The science is ahead of our humanity, it seems to me.
Yeah, and then there's also the unknowns, because it's a new virus. It's a very weird virus, not very well understood. So who knows what impact it's going to be having, to people who've been infected, to coming generations.
We don't know.
Knows.
No, nor do we know the cumulative effect of the isolation, let alone the actual disease itself. But many scientists and scholars are thinking about the impact on young, the elderly. I mean, so we're going to be reading about the impacts of COVID, not just as a disease at the physical level, but at the mental and social level for decades. But yet it was politicized very rapidly as if people knew, like, don't wear masks. It aborts your freedom. People are very confident saying things like that. And, we politicized and made, again, made this the stuff of strife as opposed to trying to solve it collectively. But
well, and there was also the fact that because it was new, there was not an immediate answer. And so what science told people, it vacillated. First, they were saying one thing, then they were saying another. As the data came in, it changed what scientists were suggesting the response should be. And we don't seem to react as people very well to that. We want a yes, no answer all the time. We don't seem to be able to track with changes as science finds things out. We don't seem to be able to say, oh yeah, well, what they said yesterday was based on yesterday's data. There's new data today, so it changes what we should do.
I guess I'm fortunate in that I like change. So
I think you're an anomaly.
We say it's the best adaptive adaptation for a good life. So you're in luck.
and I'm with you, Dave. I always have too. And one of my favorite songs, I don't even remember what the title of it was anymore, but there's a lyric from a Jefferson Airplane song. Life is change, how it differs from the rocks.
Yes. Yeah. And
I
So-
love that.
I would just say as we come to our 11:30 hour, the role of scholars, scientists, and academics in government, in pursuing power, in having a just, caring society, is very much on my mind. And the idea of studying something and then setting it aside as like, here's what I've studied, but not acting as a result of the study is troublesome to me. And that's my final takeaway after.
Okay, so my final takeaway is, do we want to continue this book group? Is there something else we want to read? Is there some other way we want to get together from our different locations? We can't just meet for coffee. So do we want to do a next step, or are we comfortable with what we've done?